Welcome to Herdly, where books turn into 3 stories, refreshing your knowledge in minutes. Today, we study together Alexander Kriss's book, Borderline: The Biography of a Personality Disorder, in which we probe into the hidden connections between historical perceptions, personal trauma, and the misunderstood world of borderline personality disorder. Alexander Kriss is an assistant professor of clinical psychology at Fordham University. Don't go away. Herdly, the editor, will be right back with the story. I want to share 3 stories that illustrate the profound impact of historical perceptions and personal trauma on the development and understanding of borderline personality disorder, BPD. These stories are not just cases. They are vivid windows into the complexities of human emotion and the often misunderstood world of those living on the borderline. The first story takes us to a psychiatric ward in Manhattan, where a patient named Joe stood out. Joe was admitted after claiming to be suicidal, a claim that many of the staff quickly dismissed as manipulative, a hallmark, they believed, of someone with BPD. Joe didn't fit the typical image of a suicidal patient. She lounged casually in the hallways, engaging others with a mix of charm and defiance. In one group therapy session, Joe took part in a creative writing exercise where each patient contributed to a collaborative story. When it was Joe's turn, she wrote a line that shocked the room. Unfortunately, they all died in a car crash on the way over. The story, intended to be a therapeutic exercise, was abruptly darkened by Joe's contribution. The other patients were visibly upset, and the group atmosphere became tense. Joe's actions were seen as an attempt to sabotage the session, reinforcing the staff's belief that she was beyond help. But beneath her seemingly destructive behavior was a deep well of pain and fear. Joe's need to disrupt wasn't about control. It was about expressing an inner turmoil that no one had yet understood. Her story is a stark reminder that those labeled as manipulative or attention-seeking often carry burdens that are dismissed by those around them. It's easy to see her as a problem, but much harder to see her as a person in desperate need of understanding and care. The second story is about Anna, a woman in her late 20s who entered therapy after experiencing a horrific trauma. Anna had been raped by her boyfriend Tom, but instead of seeking justice, she found herself trapped in a cycle of self-blame and confusion. In one of her early therapy sessions, Anna shared a dream where a spirit spoke to her of a horrible dowry, a legacy of pain passed down through generations of women in her family. This dream haunted Anna, blurring the lines between reality and nightmare. She believed on some level that the violence she suffered was an inheritance, something she was destined to endure. Anna's way of coping became increasingly erratic. She even broke her years-long commitment to veganism, convinced that eating a hamburger would somehow restore what had been taken from her. The act of consuming meat, something so primal and symbolic, was her way of trying to reclaim control over her body. Yet, she described the experience as feeling like a wolf, feral and disconnected from the person she once was. Anna's struggle to make sense of her trauma through such extreme behaviors reveals the profound impact of personal history on mental health. Her story illustrates how trauma can warp one's sense of identity and self-worth, leading to actions that seem irrational, but are, in reality, desperate attempts to heal. The third story brings us to a different kind of battlefield, one of childhood abandonment and adult alienation. Blake, a man with a history of borderline tendencies, held a deep-seated belief that children, including his younger self, were unworthy of love and protection. This belief stemmed from his father's abandonment when Blake was just 6 years old. The trauma of that abandonment was compounded by years of instability, as Blake's mother dragged him and his siblings across the country in search of emotional and financial stability. In therapy, Blake expressed his disdain for children, dismissing their fears and needs as irrelevant. His harsh view of children wasn't just an opinion, it was a defense mechanism, a way to justify the neglect he suffered and protect himself from the pain of his past. But as the conversation continued, Blake's tough exterior began to crack. He realized that his anger toward children was a reflection of his unresolved feelings about his own childhood. The split he had maintained between child and adult was a psychological survival tactic, but it also kept him from healing. Blake's story shows how early experiences of abandonment and neglect can shape one's worldview, often in ways that perpetuate further suffering. These stories reveal how historical perceptions of mental illness, combined with personal trauma, shape the lives of those with BPD. Historically, conditions like hysteria were often misunderstood and misdiagnosed, particularly in women. This legacy persists today in the way BPD is frequently portrayed as a manipulative or untreatable disorder, especially when it comes to women. Jo's experience in the psychiatric ward is a direct descendant of this history, where her behavior was seen as deliberate defiance rather than a cry for help. Anna's story illustrates how trauma is not just a moment in time, but a force that can shape one's identity across generations. The legacy of pain, as she saw in her dream, can feel inescapable, binding her to a cycle of self-destruction. Blake's narrative underscores the profound impact of childhood experiences on adult behavior. His disdain for children was a reflection of his unresolved trauma, a defense against the pain of feeling unloved and abandoned. These connections, between past and present, between societal views and personal experiences, highlight the complexity of BPD. It is not just a disorder, but a manifestation of deeper, often hidden struggles with identity, trauma, and history. Understanding BPD requires us to look beyond the surface behaviors and consider the underlying pain and confusion that drive them. It challenges us to rethink our assumptions about mental illness and to approach those who suffer from it with greater empathy and understanding. As the editor of Herdley, through learning these stories, we can learn to see beyond labels and diagnoses, embracing a more nuanced understanding of the human experience that acknowledges the deep roots of pain and the potential for healing. In revisiting the hidden connections between historical perceptions, personal trauma, and the misunderstood world of borderline personality disorder, BPD, it becomes clear how deeply intertwined these elements are in shaping the lives of those affected. The past informs the present, and the weight of history often determines how individuals with BPD are perceived and treated. One final story that illustrates this is about a young woman named Clara. She had been diagnosed with BPD after years of volatile relationships and self-destructive behavior. Clara's life was a series of highs and lows, her emotions swinging wildly from euphoria to despair. During therapy, she revealed that her mother had been a strict, emotionally distant woman who often dismissed Clara's feelings as dramatic or irrelevant. This constant invalidation during her formative years left Clara struggling to trust her own emotions and those of others. The lack of emotional support created a void that Clara desperately tried to fill through intense, often toxic relationships. Her story is a poignant example of how early emotional neglect can lead to a lifelong battle with identity and stability. The narrative of BPD is one of complex interconnections between personal history and broader societal views. Clara's experience, like those shared earlier, underscores the importance of understanding BPD not as a fixed label, but as a deeply human struggle influenced by many factors. As the editor of Herdley, by learning these stories, we can cultivate a more compassionate approach to mental health, recognizing the profound impact of both history and personal experience on the psyche.